The Great Reversal. What if the Bible was told backwards? Alright, so this is where all four parts finally come together. The first three episodes had us looking at the land, following the Jordan River from Utah Lake into the Great Salt Lake, looking at places like Moab and Mount Nebo, comparing landscapes, names, waterways, and realizing some of these similarities are a little harder to laugh off once you actually start looking. Even the U.S. Geological Survey published a comparison between Utah's Jordan Valley and the Jordan Valley of the Holy Land. So eventually, I had to ask myself, if we're willing to look at the map again, why wouldn't we look at the people again? Let's go back to 1524. Giovanni de Verrazzano reaches the Carolina coast and describes indigenous people as dark in complexion, not unlike the Ethiopians with thick black hair. Then, in 1564, Jack LeMoyne is in Florida documenting the Tamaqua, who were described as dark-skinned with black hair. 20 years later, John White is in Roanoke, North Carolina, actually painting the indigenous men, women, and children he encounters. Those original watercolors, they're still sitting in the British Museum. And in 1590, those images make their way into Thomas Harrod's A Brief and True Report of the Newfoundland of Virginia, along with Theodore de Bry's engravings and maps. So now we're not dealing with one random description. We've got decades of writings, artwork, maps, and eyewitnesses, observations from different Europeans describing and depicting the people who were already here. And that's when I started wondering, what happened between those people and the identities we inherited later? Because once you get into the government records, race starts looking a whole lot less permanent than we were taught. By 1930, a federal census instructions specifically dealt with people who had both Indian and Negro ancestry, and under certain circumstances, the enumerator was instructed to record that person as Negro. Now imagine that happening across generations. One official writes something down, the next record follows the first one. Children inherit the classification, and eventually the paperwork starts speaking louder than the actual family history. And Walter Plecker shows exactly how far that could go. After Virginia passes the Racial Integrity Act in 1924, Plecker spent years challenging families who identify as Indian and pushing many of them into the category colored. Then, in 1943, he circulates an actual surname list of families he doesn't believe should be recognized as Indian. So when I ask who was holding the pen, that's why. Because sometimes the label survives longer than the person it was put on. Now put the slave trade numbers beside that. By 1860, almost 4 million enslaved people were counted in the United States. But 4 million Africans didn't step directly off ships into mainland North America. The commonly cited estimate for people who survived the transatlantic trade into North America is around 388,000. Africans absolutely came here, but I believe the story of the slave trade became grossly exaggerated into a one-size-fits-all explanation for everybody who eventually got classified as Negro, colored, black, and later African American. Especially when Europeans were already describing dark indigenous people here in the 1500s. And we know native ancestry could later disappear underneath another classification on paper. So how many of us were already here? And now we get to the Smithsonian. One of the biggest names in American physical anthropology was Alish Hrdlicka. Now I'm sorry, first time I heard Alish Hrdlicka, my brain was like, L. Hard liquor? I said, hold on, does the Smithsonian have a happy hour I don't know about? Then I find out this man spent decades around skulls, bones, and human remains, and I thought, okay, maybe the hard liquor was the coping strategy. But jokes aside, hard liquor had an enormous influence in physical anthropology. bones, skulls, human remains, measurements, artifacts. Somebody had to decide how to get all that classified, what population it belonged to, and ultimately what description future generations would read underneath the glass. And since we're already at the Smithsonian, here's one more little piece. 1909, the Arizona Gazette publishes the story of G.E. Kincaid, who supposedly discovered an underground complex in the Grand Canyon containing mummies, hieroglyphics, copper, gold objects, and temple-like chambers. The article claimed the Smithsonian was involved. The Smithsonian today says it has no record of that expedition. Interesting. Keep moving. Because then there's Bat Creek. A stone comes out of the Smithsonian Associated excavation in Tennessee in 1889. It's initially interpreted as Cherokee. Decades later, Cyrus Gordon looks at the inscription from another orientation and says it resembles Paleo-Hebrew. Other researchers call it a 19th century forgery. And that's fine. We can argue about Bat Creek all day, because Bat Creek doesn't have to carry this theory by itself. Neither does Verrazano, neither does one census, neither does one map. That's what these 4 episodes have really been about. The first 3 kept moving the camera across the land. This one turns the camera around and looks at us. Now we've got geography that deserves another look, eyewitness descriptions of dark indigenous populations, surviving paintings and maps, documented black and native overlap, government census rules, native families being reclassified, the difference between the slave trade arrival numbers and the population that existed generations later, Smithsonian anthropology, and these recurring questions about Hebrew connections in America. That's a lot of different roads. And that's why I call this the Great Reversal. Because maybe what we got reversed wasn't just our understanding of the map. Maybe somewhere along the way, the map and the family tree got separated from each other. The geography got a new story. The people got new labels. And eventually those labels became the history. So don't take my word for it. Start with the dates. 1524, Verrazano. 1564, Lemoyne. 1585, John White. 1590, Harriet Ann DeBry. 1930, the Census Instructions. 1924 and 1943, Walter Plecker. Then go back through the geography from parts 1, 2, and 3. Put it together yourself. Maybe the biggest question of this entire series isn't, were we looking at the wrong map? Maybe it's, what if we were already standing on it? I'm DVS1, and this is the Minority Report. And this is the Great Reversal.